What up, my friends? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we have one of my favorite videos to film and share, and that is a book wrap up for the month of May. If this is your first time during one of these videos with me, I never share spoilers, okay? I wouldn't do that to you. We are friends. But I do give a little bit of a summary, just what to expect from the book, a little bit about the plot, if you will, what genre it's in, and then I also go over my ratings for both stars and spice. So I rate on a scale of 1 to 5 for stars and 1 to 5 for spice. I don't use any fancy scale or anything like that. It's just the feeling that I had when I walked away from the book. In the month of May, I read 17 books. I read mostly romance, so most of these this month in particular, I seem to have been extra heavy in romance, but there are a couple that veer off a little bit. And a couple books that really surprised me this month, so I'm excited to share them with you. If you're new to this channel, thank you so much for clicking on that thumbnail and giving me a chance. I do these book wrap-ups once a month, and then throughout the year, I'll jump in and share some of my top book recommendations. But primarily on this channel, I do a lot of haul videos for like Costco, Sam's Club, Trader Joe's, Target. So if you end up enjoying my vibe, please feel free to check out the rest of my channel and consider subscribing before you leave. Now, taking a suggestion from my last video, what I'm gonna be doing is when I start going over my review for the stars and the spice, I'll share a little clip on the screen that shows the book and then the rating. And then the suggestion was that I do it again at the end when I'm wrapping up my review. That way, if you thought from the review it sounded like something you'd want to read, you could take the time to screenshot it. In addition to that suggestion, I'm also just going to take it one step further to make it even easier on you, and I will do a list down below of all of the books that I discussed in this video, what the rating was, and then that way if you wanted to screenshot it before heading to the library or to your favorite bookstore, then you have that available to be able to just screenshot and have an easy ready list. If you find yourself needing even more book recommendations, I do have a book Instagram that is completely dedicated to book content, so please feel free to go over there. I started out the month really strong with the book called The Rom-Con by Devon. It had been on my radar for a while and it finally came through on my library, so I was super pumped about it. This one is a romantic comedy. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 for stars and 1 out of 5 peppers for the spice. So this one follows Cassidy, who's been venting to her beloved grandmother about the trials and tribulations that she's been experiencing with modern dating. So her grandmother quickly recommends that she use some antiquated methods that she used during her time to try and land herself a man. Cassidy is just desperate enough to agree, and she finds herself the perfect person to test it out on, the owner of the rival publication company to the one that she works for. Okay, so what I loved about this book is it has a very nostalgic feeling to it. Very like 90s, early 2000s rom-com type vibe. So if you're an elder like I am, you would probably love this book. However, you do have to take it all with a grain of salt and not overthink it, because there are some messages in here that I feel like could have used a little bit of work. What I was impressed with is that I think those little pieces that I'm talking about that were a little bit touchy, if you overanalyzed it, it would probably drive you crazy. But the fact that the author even attempts to discuss some of the topics that she discusses impressed me, because it had to have been a very big balancing act to make sure you're not irritating different people. The other thing is that I felt like, talking back to the nostalgia factor, the overall plot felt very familiar. So in terms of like getting cozy with a story, it felt so familiar, but the author also takes it in some unique directions, so it wasn't boring. If you're looking to just kind of get back into one of those nostalgic rom-coms, this might be the one for you. All right, the next one was called A Well-Trained Lady by Jess Heileman, and this is a historical romance that I gave a 5-star out of 5 to. 0 out of 5 on the spice. So it is a completely clean historical romance. I am never gonna stop singing the praises of Jess Heileman. I have now read every single book that she has published. There's another one coming out in the month of June that I'm super excited to read. But I've read everything that she has out and published, and every single one has been a 5-star. So if you happen to have landed on this video and you have any platform, even if there's 5 people that listen to you about book reviews, please go pick up a Jess Heileman, agree with me, and then tell everybody about it. Please spread the word, because she needs to be read by other people, because the amount of joy that she brings in her words is just unparalleled. So this one follows Arabella, who has denied the pursuit of many a suitor because she has very, very high standards for herself, and she's holding herself out for one esteemed match, but he is currently out of the country. So while that is occurring, she ends up going to stay with an old family friend, and some of the feelings that she didn't even think she could feel anymore start to resurface. So the thing with Jess Heileman is that she has set the standard so high for me that every time I pick up another historical romance, I just can never get the feeling that I get from her books. She writes the epitome of romance. It's so swoony. The language is just so beautiful. It's breathtaking. It just takes you away. You feel like you just get swept up in it. I absolutely loved the characters in this book, and I loved the journey that they go on. Jess always, I like how I'm like saying her name like we're on a first name basis here. She always like sprinkles in just enough of the mystery, reveals it piece by piece to keep you intrigued, but not giving it away, so the last like 30% of the book is completely unused. It was honestly difficult for me to even put this book down. I don't know what it is. She just has this way of writing where your heart is not racing, but you're so invested in the characters and the story that you don't want to walk away from it. So 5-star read for me, 100% recommend. All right, the next book that I read was called 4 Weekends and a Funeral by Ellie Palmer. This book was actually sent to me in exchange for an honest review, and it doesn't release until August 6th, 2024. If you've never been part of one of my videos before, I just want to take a moment and say that when I say honest review, I truly mean it. Integrity to me is absolutely the utmost important. So somebody sending me a book to read digitally would never, ever sway me away from my integrity. So whenever I share a review, even if it was a book that was sent to me, I will always be honest. Having said that, this book was 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. There's no spice in this one, so 0 out of 5 on the spice. So in this book, Allison shows up at her ex-boyfriend's funeral, and his sister appears to be the only person that knew they broke up. She begs Allison not to reveal to the rest of the family so their heart doesn't have to be broken a second time. And since she's a lifelong people pleaser, she agrees not only to that plan, but also to getting his condo ready to sell with his very, very grouchy best friend. The first thing that I need to say about this one is this book would not be for everybody. And honestly, having stepped away from it, I'm shocked it was even for me, but it worked. This is not like your swoony, sweet, loving rom-com. This has a very like morbid vibe to it without being like overly morbid, but there was definitely like a morbid undertone to it. It's very, very slow, super messy, but like ultimate dry humor. So if you don't like dry humor, this one is probably not going to be for you. But for me, I just thought the dry humor was like very witty, very charming, and it just made it a little bit different because like I said, I'm usually like the type that loves that sickly, sweet, swoony type romance, and this one was so far outside the box for me. The only reason it's not a 5-star for me is there is a little bit of repetition, which led to me getting a little bit frustrated at points. But overall, I think the author does a phenomenal job at navigating a lot of the difficult things the characters are going through, and I just think this would be the perfect book to kind of mix up your TBR. This one releases August 6th, so pre-order it or put it on your library list or whatever you need to do. I think this is a really cool one. All right, the next book that I read was a spicy romance from one of my favorite authors, and it's The Paradise Problem by Christina. This was an absolute 5-star read for me. For spice, I gave it a 1. It was actually part of my book of the month subscription. So if you don't know what book of the month is, basically you can go on there and they usually have 5 to 6 different titles that you can pick, hardcover, very nice quality books, and they're usually spread throughout all different genres, and then you can actually do add-on books as well. So I ended up picking The Paradise Problem as my book of the month. I love book of the month because I ended up actually getting the book a few days before it was actually officially published, so I felt like super VIP. If book of the month is something that's been on your radar, I'll leave a referral link down below. If you've never been a subscriber before, you can get your first book for only $5. So even if it's worth just testing it out for a month to get a book for $5, like come on. This month they had so many good options. It was wild. So I'm pumped for my June picks as well. Anyways, getting back into the book. So this one follows Anna, or it might be Anna. I don't know because I was reading it, so you never know. Is it Anna? Is it Anna? Who knows? We'll go with Anna. She is struggling really hard, and she's working several jobs to cover her father's medical and living expenses. She ends up losing one of those jobs and decides to just wallow in some self-pity when all of a sudden she gets a knock on the door from somebody from her past who's offering her an opportunity that she has no choice but to take. I don't know what it was about this book. It was a romance. It was a very straightforward romance, but I devoured this book. I didn't want to be apart from this book. I don't want Christina Lauren to ever stop writing, and I want them to actually write more books, but at the same time, if I'm not going to get the caliber that they've been delivering, maybe I'll be okay with the fact that they're only doing 1 or 2 books a year, you know? Maybe it's more than that, but it doesn't feel like it. I think they have another one coming out soon, so I need to relax. But I just absolutely fell in love with these characters. They are from completely different backgrounds. And I love how normally when 2 people are from completely different backgrounds, it doesn't feel very realistic, them kind of molding together, but this one, they did it in a way that it completely makes sense. So there was a good amount of frustration and angst that was built into this book without going overboard. There's really not much else I can say because I don't want to give away spoilers, but I just love all of the dynamics of this book. There's a billionaire aspect, which is one of my favorite things. And it also has kind of like a Pretty Woman vibe to it. So if you're into like the nostalgic rom-coms like Pretty Woman, this book would also be for you. All right, the next book that I read was called Meet You in the Middle by Devon Daniels. So this is the same author that I mentioned earlier for the book The Rom-Con. So this is a spicy romance. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 on Stars, and I gave it a 1 out of 5 on Spice. So this one follows Katie, who is a staffer in the Senate, and she and her boss are trying to pass a child care bill. But in order to do so, they have to reach across the aisle to try and get some support. In order to do so, she has to meet with another staffer, Ben, who ends up being late to the meeting, is incredibly rude, and barely allows her to even get 10 words out before completely shutting her idea down. She ends up giving him a piece of her mind, he gives it right back, and pretty soon they find themselves involved in an office war flinging insults. Here's the thing. Okay, just like I said with the rom-con, is with this book, you have to be able to go into it and not get nitpicky. And I tried my hardest, you guys. I truly, truly tried my hardest. This is a political romance. Authors obviously have their own opinions. I cannot imagine how difficult it was for an author to try and write a story about 2 people that are on opposing political sides, especially with the way the climate of life is right now. As with the first book, I'm impressed that she even attempted it, to be honest. But I can't help but think that her political views held her back from being able to be fair in the way that she was reporting the different political views. In terms of the actual enemies to lovers plot and the banter, the author did such a phenomenal job. But where she lost me is there was a lot of messages, at least to me, where it felt like the female main character was constantly in the wrong. The male main character was constantly the one that was in the right. And if he did anything wrong, it was the female's fault because it was just the way he was reacting to what she was doing. That was the message I walked away from. And I just think that's an incredibly irresponsible message to give in a romance. So I had a hard time getting past that. Overall though, I think the concept of like having 2 opposing political people in a romantic comedy that start out with like rivals type vibe, I think it was phenomenal. So I really enjoyed it. It's just that I could not get past the way things felt a little unbalanced. The next book I have literally been putting off for months. I have this awful habit, I've shared it before, where I have the Libby app. If you don't have the Libby app with your library, please get yourself the Libby app. But I go on there and I waitlist certain titles, and then those waitlists become available, and then I sit there and go, I don't really feel like reading that, because I am very much a mood reader. So I'll be like, I don't really feel like reading that. And then I will extend the hold. So I'll say somebody else can read the book, just bring it back to me. And then I just do that forever. Well, one of my friends had been doing a challenge for herself where she stopped doing that for a while. She accepted every book that came in and got it out of her queue. So I said, fine, I'll do the same thing, which I'm so glad she did that because it led to me reading the book Bride by Hazelwood. It's a fantasy romance. It is so not my style book, but I ended up giving it 5 stars. And I feel wild even saying that, and we'll get into it on my review. Spice on this one was higher than I expected, and it was a 2 out of 5 on the spice. So this one follows Misery. Yes, her name is Misery. She's the daughter of a very important vampire, and she's been living her life in the human world. Well, her father summons her back to announce that she needs to marry the alpha of the werewolves in an arranged marriage. She's about to say no to him, but he happens to say a name that she immediately knows may help her find her friend that has been missing. I feel like this book is for a very specific audience, and I am shocked to find out that I am apparently a member of that audience. I am not a fantasy girly. Okay, I loved Fourth Wing, I loved Iron Flame, but that seems to have been a complete fluke because most of the other fantasies that I've tried since then, I haven't been able to get into. This one was just a wild ride. It had like the werewolf and vampire fantasy aspect, but at the core of it, it almost kind of felt like a mafia book. So there's like so many elements going on. There's like found family. It's super dry, witty humor, and the characters are not at all lovable. Like, they are not at all lovable, but I loved them. So just, what? Like, make that make sense. I don't even know what else to say about this book. I don't know how to even convince you to pick it up because I don't want you to judge me if you get to the end of it and you're like, Kate, what did you just have me read? You know what I mean? But if you are looking to kind of step outside of your comfort zone, if you're okay with spice, if you're okay with things being a little weird, this may be the book for you. I don't know what else to say, you guys. It was a 5-star. I'm happy that I read it. I'm shocked that I enjoyed it as much as I did, and that's the entire review. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, you guys. The next one it's a bummer for me, and I know I'm probably going to be getting yelled at through the screen. I can hear you already starting to yell, but this is the book Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. This one is a dark romance, and I unfortunately gave it 3 stars out of 5, and honestly, that feels a little generous. Spice, I gave it a 2 out of 5. The premise of this book is great. It's about 2 serial killers that end up running into one another, and they enter in an annual game of trying to beat the other one. Each year that goes by, they start to realize that their feelings are evolving for one another, and they're no longer just stabby feelings that are happening. My question is, this book starts off with a long list of trigger warnings. Okay, so honestly, Spice might even be like a little bit higher than a 2. Very long list of trigger warnings. Some of them are like absolute no's for people, but somehow a book with the longest list of trigger warnings ended up boring me so badly. I don't know what it was, but I could not get into this book. I don't think the way the timeline happens is for me, because essentially what happens is I feel like they just get plopped into a scene. The scene happens, and then time is literally fast forwarded, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year. And there's no like build up to each of the situations. So they have like the annual things happening where they're trying to get these people, and it just felt like there was no development in each one of those. And from like a crime side, I would have enjoyed having a little bit more development for each of the events that happen, basically. I don't know how else to say that without like spoilers or without like triggering something, you know, with the YouTube algorithm. I don't know. I also just felt like absolutely no connection with the 2 characters. And I think it's because a majority of their relationship actually isn't even occurring in person. So I don't know if that tripped me up. Maybe I'm just not meant for like super modern dating. It just wasn't for me. If you happen to have liked this book and you haven't read the Mind F series by St. Abbey, I don't know if it's possible that I don't like this one because I felt that one was so superior and I only read it like a month or 2 ago. So that could be why. Like, that was a 5-star series for me. So maybe that's why I didn't end up loving this one, because I was like comparing to that one. All right, the next book that I read was The Au Pair Affair by Tessa Bailey. This was another book that was sent to me in exchange for an honest review. This one releases on July 16th of this year. This one I was super excited about because I read Fangirl Down by Tessa Bailey, which is the first in this series, and I absolutely loved it. I don't remember what my exact score was, but I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a great golf romance, and golf is usually not my thing. But unfortunately, it was not a total love for me. This one was a 3.5 out of 5 on the stars and 2 out of 5 on the spice. So there is a little bit more spice than most of the books that I normally read. So this one follows Tallulah, who is studying to become a marine biologist in the city of Poston. She ends up meeting somebody who needs an au pair position to be filled, and he's able to offer her housing, which is not easy to come by in Boston. She's struggling with the decision of whether or not she should move in with him, because although she loves the 12-year-old daughter that he has, she has a lot of trust issues with men that she needs to work through. Let's just go over a couple of the things that are happening in this book, okay? It's set in Boston. I'm originally from Massachusetts. It's a hockey romance with a single dad, with an adorable 12-year-old, with a hot scientist who's a live-in nanny. There's an age gap between the two of them. Lots of prose happening, okay? But for whatever reason, I just could not get into this book. There were quotes that were super insightful. There were some that were super swoony. And then there was points where I was literally laughing out loud. But the other parts in the in-between just kept like dragging me out of those high moments. And it just left me at the end being like, I didn't really love this book. But I will say, if you are the type of person who reads a book for the spicy scenes, those scenes were done incredibly well. There's dirty talk happening that's on a pretty great level. So if you're reading books for that purpose, for the escape, this might be the one for you. But if you are the type like me who needs it to be like heavier on the plot and let the spice take the back seat, it might not be the one for you. All right, the next book that I read was The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. Or it might be Poston, I'm not too sure. This one's a romance, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 on the stars, and I gave it a 0.5 out of 5 on the pepper. The spiciness is discussed, but it's never super explicit, but I don't feel like it's a fully clean romance, so I just figured I'd touch base on that. So this one follows Clementine, who's an absolute workaholic, and she's up for a major promotion at work, but her entire life changes in one weekend just by entering her apartment. She enters the apartment and is transported back in time, and there's a man from 7 years in the past. Every time she leaves, she's not sure if he is or is not going to be there when she gets back, and she finds herself wanting to spend more time with him. This was such a unique story, and I loved The Dead Romantics by this same author, so I thought that I was going to absolutely love this book as well, because she was very creative in her solutions in the first book. But this one, I just felt very confused. I felt thoroughly confused the entire time. And it just felt very unfinished. And it's hard to even explain that without diving into spoilers. But I just felt like almost every single thing that occurred felt unfinished, and it felt very jumpy. A lot of the scenes would fade to black, and then you would just start in a new day, and it just felt like nothing was developed or wrapped up from the previous scene that had happened. So it felt like she was writing it like it was a movie, but I just was confused. It just left me feeling confused. I will say though, however, it's all set in New York City, and the way that she writes the setting of New York City just, it had me in my feels. It felt like I was strolling through New York City, taking in the sights and the sounds and the smells and just everything. So when it came to the writing aspect, it was really written in a beautiful way. The verbiage that she uses is beautiful. It was just the execution that wasn't all there for me. All right, so the next book that I read was called Project Duke by Mariah Stone. And then this one is a historical romance. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 on stars and 1 out of 5 on the spice. So this one follows Calliope, who has a dream to start her own sleuth agency. But before she can do that, she needs to solve a mystery in her own family about her beloved brother who has gone missing. She ends up turning to a naval officer who does not have the best reputation, and it turns out that they both have something the other needs. So this one has a very like cozy mystery romance vibe to it. It's not like a total love for me. That's why I gave it a 3.5. It wasn't like I was mad I read it or anything like that. It just was like lukewarm. It's one of those ones I don't have a lot of comments on because the mystery was cute, the couple was cute, the characters on their own were cute. A little bit of it is a little too cringy and cheesy for me, but overall it was cute, and I like the series. I think this was like the 3rd book in the series. Pretty sure there's 4 altogether, and we're gonna finally get to like the big drama with the brother that was missing. Anyways, overall cute. I can't wait to wrap this one up. It's not one that I'm like, you have to rush out and read it, but it is available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're into like historical romances, cozy mysteries, those type of things, you could pick this one up if you have Kindle Unlimited. All right, the next book that I read was called Happily Never After by Lynn Painter. This was a spicy romantic comedy, 4.5 out of 5 on the stars, 1 out of 5 on the spice. This one follows Sophie, who has found out that her fiancé has cheated on her yet again and she needs to call off the wedding. However, he has a habit of spinning things to his own narrative, so she needs to make it clear to all of the wedding guests that it was not her fault. So her best friend hires an objector to step in and stop the ceremony and make it clear whose fault it was. So the objector is Max. He steps in, saves the day for Sophie, and she finds herself very intrigued by what he does for a living and ends up joining forces with him to make sure that people are not entering bad marriages. So this one, I just loved it. Okay, it was, like I said, 4.5 for me, which is like pretty strong. And it was one of those ones that I'm usually the type, I like a very involved story. I like there to be a lot of depth and things like that. This one was very straightforward, very dry humor, very quick, very witty banter. And I just loved it. I just loved the progression of it. It felt very simple. It didn't feel overdone. I'd love a little bit more of a wrap up with a couple of the background relationships, specifically with the ex, only because I'm like toxic and I just love when an ex tries to grovel, you know what I mean? And I felt like there was a missed opportunity there. But overall, I just loved how like open and honest the dialogue was. They were kind of stumbling through cynicism when it comes to romance, and they each had varying degrees of it. And I don't know, it was just cute and definitely one that I would recommend. All right, the next book was The Fiancé Dilemma by Elena Armas. I hope I pronounced that correctly. This was another one that was sent to me in exchange for an honest review, and it releases on July 30th of this year. So this one's a spicy romantic comedy. I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 on the stars and 1 out of 5 on the spice. This one follows Josie, who is a town mayor in a very small town, and she recently reconnected with her biological father. He is a pretty big deal, so when the public finds out that Josie even exists, they start to attack her past, and specifically the amount of failed engagements that she has. She has to come up with a way to save his and her reputation, and the only thing she can come up with is faking an engagement with her newly found sister's best friend. So this book, it just was not a love for me, and I think why was the male main character in this book, he seems to just be so massively confused. He just stumbles through the first like 7 or so chapters, just seemingly very, very confused. So that just left me like without a connection to him or without a connection to the relationship. I think that this would have been better if there was like a dual point of view where I could see what the heck he was thinking, because it just felt very like he was deer in headlights for a good portion of the book. And then after that, he seems to escalate to one of those possessive growler type characters, and it just felt like such an aggressive lane change. So I think that I just had a hard time with him. I really enjoyed Josie. I really enjoyed how she was working through a lot of the insecurities that she had. I felt like there was potential for there to be a deeper dive into a lot of those feelings. But overall, I think it was a cute book. I really liked the first book in the series. I think it was called The Long Game. And I have enjoyed other books from Elena Armas in the past, so I'll definitely be picking up more from her. This one just was not a love for me. You guys, the next one, Abby Jimenez, Just for the Summer. I am so mad I took so long to read this, and when I say so long, I think I've owned it for like 2 months. This one was 5 stars for me. It's a romance, 0.5 out of 5 on the spice. There's no real like explicit scenes, but there's some that are definitely on the riskier side. So before you enter it. This follows Justin and Emma. They share the same curse. Anytime they break up with somebody, that somebody ends up meeting their soulmate, the next person they start dating. They end up discovering each other on a Reddit thread and decide that maybe they should try to date each other to see if they can break the curse and find their own soulmates. Okay, Abby Jimenez. If you have not read a book by her, please go out and just pick one. Just go pick one. The way that she's able to weave trauma topics into a romance, it's honestly disrespectful, because how do you have that much talent? Could you have not saved some for the rest of us? You know, like it is a little bit rude, but at the same time, I get to benefit from it because I was sucked into this book, like absolutely sucked into this book. One point I actually threw it down because I was shocked. It's a romance. What would make you viscerally react so strongly that you throw something? But that's what Abby Jimenez does to you. She just has this way of balancing trauma with humor, with light moments. She's in a league of her own. She is in a league of her own. She has such a phenomenal way of writing characters. Justin in this book is the ultimate book boyfriend, absolute ultimate book boyfriend. I love how she writes characters, specifically males, in such a vulnerable and open and honest way. It's unmatched. I don't know what else to say. My words are not worthy to even discuss this book, but please do yourself a favor. Go pick up anything from her. But if you were thinking about reading this one, I would personally say read the Part of Your World, then Yours Truly, then this one, because I think that would be doing it justice. So do that. Just spend the rest of this month reading Abby Jimenez. That is the moral of this story. All right, and then another one from my favorite, Jess Heileman, Somewhat of a Ruse. This one was actually a novella. It's a Regency romance novella. This one, I gave it a 5 out of 5 on the stars. No shock there after what I told you about Jess at the beginning of this video, and then 0 out of 5 on the spice. So this one follows Laura, who's a governess at her cousin's estate, but it's very important to her entire family that nobody finds out about her true past because it would disgrace the family in polite society. Her uncle ends up turning to her to get assistance in getting a match for her cousin with a very esteemed gentleman, and the two of them end up finding feelings for one another. So as I said before, Jess Heileman has set an impossible standard. So I'm just going to need her to continue writing for the rest of time because every time I read a book of hers, I'm just completely blown away. This one was just so special. The heroine was just so layered, and I loved the way she handled the internal struggles she's going through and how she's trying to get herself through a very impossible situation. She's having to take on the burden of her family while trying to stay true to herself, and I just think that it was navigated in such a gorgeous way. I honestly could have read like 700 pages of this story, but this one is just a novella, and I think the author just took advantage of every single word that was used and not a single word was wasted. So it was just a nice, quick, easy way to be swept away to a different time. All right, the next book was called Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter, and this was a young adult romance. 4.5 out of 5 on the stars and 0 out of 5 on the spice. So I don't normally read young adult romances. I didn't even know this was a young adult when I went into it because I had just seen somebody post it as a recommendation and I must not have paid attention. But I quickly realized that it's a young adult once I got into it. And so just like go into it knowing it's a young adult because it is more on the, I'm not going to say juvenile, but you know, there is definitely a difference between how young adult and regular, more mature romances are written. I ended up just loving this one. So it follows Liz, who is a teenager who's obsessed with rom-coms thanks to her beloved mom who had passed away. She feels like everything is finally coming together in her own life because her childhood crush who had moved away years ago finally moves back to their town. But he kind of has eyes for somebody else. So she ends up turning to one of the other kids in the neighborhood who is her nemesis to try and get closer to the guy she wants. This book just, it shocked me. If you are looking to get thrusted back into all of the emotions you experience when you're in high school, this would be the book for you. It starts off definitely on the young adult side, but then it slowly starts to like build and transform into something so much deeper than I expected. I think the way the author balances the maturity level of the female main character is absolutely phenomenal because she's very realistically a teenager, but she also has a maturity about her because of the things that she's gone through in life. But there's moments when that slips and it's very clear that she's still a child who's still trying to figure things out. And I like the way that that was navigated and directed. It has such a sense of nostalgia when it comes to rom-coms. It's literally like a love letter to rom-coms of the 90s and early 2000s. There's music that's integrated into it. It was such a comfort read. It was really, truly a comfort read. And I think it would be the perfect palate cleanser if you're in between heavier books. All right. And then I know I just told you guys that I don't usually read young adults, and that is true, but somehow I jumped into yet another young adult, and that was Check Plus Mate from Ellie Hazelwood. So this one I gave a 4.5 out of 5 on the stars. And for spice, even though it's a young adult, I'm actually going to rate it at a 0.5 out of 5. It's closed door, but if you're thinking about this for a actual young adult, the discussions are a little on the stronger side. So this follows Mallory, who's a very young and promising chess player who ends up leaving chess because of something that happens in her family. Her best friend convinces her to enter a tournament even though she's left the chess world, and no one is more shocked than her when she randomly beats the top world champion in chess. Suddenly, she finds herself being offered opportunities that she simply cannot turn down. This book is barely a romance, okay? 65% of it, the characters are barely interacting one another. It's all about chess. And why am I reading a book about chess and not wanting to put it down? I have no idea. I have never in my entire life, 37 years on this earth, been interested in the topic of chess, but somehow Ellie Hazelwood just had me completely transfixed by the subject. The buildup on the character's journey was absolutely phenomenal. And just like I mentioned in the last review about the young adult, I think the way that she balances the maturity of the female main character while being realistic with her being a teenager was done so phenomenal. This person has gone through so much in her life, and she's got a huge burden that she's carrying for the rest of her family. But there are moments where it's very clear she's a teenager, and I felt like the way that the internal battles are handled are just done in a very raw and real way. The humor in this one is super dry and super witty, so that has to be your style, because that was probably one of the best parts of this book. I just think that it was super witty, super charming, and quirky. The background characters are absolutely hilarious, so I totally loved it. I just, like, at the end of the day, I'm just truly shocked at how much I loved this book. But if you have any, like, if you've ever liked like a sports romance and you like that type of vibe, please consider picking up this book. I know everybody loved that show, The Queen's Gambit. I couldn't ever really get into it, but now I want to go back and try and watch it again after reading this. But if you loved that TV show, you would probably love this book. All right, so then the last book that I read, it was another novella. This was Beauty and the Baron by Joanna Barker. This is like a Regency romance retelling of Beauty and the Beast. This one was a 3.5 out of 5 star for me, 0 out of 5 on the spice. I think it was around 200 pages. It's just a short and sweet one if you kind of need something to mix it up. If you're a fan of Beauty and the Beast, it had the elements of Beauty and the Beast, but I like the way that the author didn't follow the plot to a T. So there are liberties taken that made it feel really fresh. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the language. There's definitely overly cheesy parts, but overall, I think that it was really cute, and I'm glad I picked it up. All right, so that wraps up everything that I read in the month of May. Do you guys have any books that you could recommend to me? I love romance, obviously. I love historical fiction, and I do enjoy a thriller. I didn't read many thrillers this month, so I should probably pick up a thriller. So if you have any good recommendations, please feel free to leave it down below. Don't forget, I have an entire Instagram dedicated to book content. So if you enjoyed my reviews, I share even more over there, and it's obviously on a more regular basis. I appreciate you so much for taking some time to join me today and listen to me blab about books. I hope I delivered whatever you needed when you clicked on that thumbnail, and I hope you have a magical day. Bye-bye.